Hello everyone. This is the 19th part of the story, Abe the Wizard. Chapter 74, Bad News. As Abel was coming out from the VIP lounge, he overheard the sound of various voices chatting. When he looked over, businessmen were chatting in the resting room of the boutique shop. Have you seen the Lord of Marshall's golden armor? Not at all, but I've heard people talked about. Well, I saw him yesterday and it completely dazzled my eyes. He came to Harvest City with his golden armor. When he got off his Inferno Bull carriage, a ray of sunlight reflected off his armor. It was shining so brightly that I could barely even see his figure. Weren't the armor of Prince Wyatt's guards also gold some time ago? It's nothing compared to that. The materials of that armors were like brass compared to the armor of Lord Marshall. When Abel heard the conversation, he knew that his beloved Uncle Marshall had taken his carriage and the Taurus armor to Harvest City to show off. However, what these businessmen were saying was true. The Royal Guard's golden armor was mixed with a lot of brass to display a golden color. Although this lowered their armor protection, their dignity was more important, so a little loss of defense didn't matter to them. Lord Abel, it would be extremely popular if you put up for sale the same armor that the Lord of Marshall was wearing. Ms. Yvette suggested to Abel, whispering towards him. Abel chuckled, waved his hand and said, "That suit of armor took too long and took too much effort to forge. I don't think I will be making another one for a while." Abel had decided not to sell any items that were identified as golden rank by Master Soren, Oak Shield. From Master Soren's speech, he felt that these golden rank equipment were extremely valuable. People would have doubted the person who was selling, where they had acquired their materials from. Furthermore, the costs of this equipment were extremely expensive and not many people could even afford them. Hearing Abel's excuses, Ms. Yvette didn't attempt to persuade him anymore. Amid the enthusiastic sound of Ms. Yvette's farewell, Abel left Edmund's boutique shop to regroup with the guards. Abel then went to all the stores selling potions in Harvest City and bought a second group of potions that could be combined into a single dose. When he was finished, there was only 11,250 gold left in his magic card. "Young master, the Lord has been searching everywhere for you to see him. He is waiting for you at another courtyard." Elliot, one of the night brigades of Harry's castle, galloped over and dismounted his horse to salute to Abel. "Elliot, how did you find me?" Abel asked strangely, bowing slightly. "The Lord's Guard and Night Brigade are all out looking for you. I'm just the first one who found," explained the Knight of Elliot. Looking at the Knight of Elliot's worried facial expression, Abel immediately began to wonder why the Lord of Marshall was in such a hurry to find him. So he hurried back into his carriage and, under the protection of the guards, rushed back to Harry Castle's courtyard in Harvest City. "Abel, here you are," said the Lord of Marshall, taking a few steps with a gloomy face, as he pulled Abel out of the carriage. "Uncle Marshall, what happened?" Abel asked quickly. "Do you remember the elite knight of Soroyan?" Lord Marshall asked, without answering Abel. "Yes, of course. He led the campaign against the orcs and won the battle. He gained a knight's estate afterward too." Although they had met only once, Abel was impressed by the elite knight of Soroyan and his modesty. "Well, something has happened to him," Lord Marshall said quietly, his eyes showing a hint of sadness. "Since the last time we met at the Lord's house, the two have been hanging out with each other several times, which they became close friends. Though the Knight of Soroyan was only an elite knight, there weren't many elite knights within Harvest City, as well as Soroyan being the commander of 1,000 elite troops. How could he be in any trouble?" Abel then looked doubtful at Marshall. The elite knight of Soroyan had been busy with the construction of his domain recently. The moment that his castle was restored, he was attacked by wolf riders, which meant no one was able to get out of the castle. A servant who went to the city to purchase food discovered the attack and quickly reported to Harvest City. But when the reinforcements have arrived, the battle was already over. The Knight of Soroyan was dead, and his head was taken away by the wolf riders. Lord Marshall gritted his teeth as he struggled in recounting the situation to Abel. Would this be the Wolf Rider's revenge? Abel was a little surprised. He suddenly thought of the Wolf family's Wolf Riders. Did it happen because of Fowler's death? From what remains of the castle, it seemed that there was only one orc there, with the majority of them being Wolf Riders. They weren't ordinary Wolf Riders because they were able to kill an elite knight. The Lord of Marshall then looked over at Abel and said, "This must be the revenge of the Wolf Riders." The last campaign probably meant a noble Wolf Rider was killed. With Saroyan being the commander of the battle, he and all his men in the castle were slaughtered for revenge. So does this mean our castle is in danger? Abel finally realized why Marshall was so eager to find him. Let's get back to the castle. We need to strengthen its defense and get ready to fight against the Wolf Riders. Lord Marshall's voice sounded very calm. However, since Abel had been through life and death battles, he could feel the murderous spirit hidden within the Lord of Marshall's voice. Can the ruler of the city send some knights to help us defend? Abel felt it would have been extremely dangerous if the Wolf Riders were able to attack a castle and kill an elite knight. Although he was not afraid of the Wolf Riders, the civilians of the castle weren't able to defend themselves against them. It was best to have as many guards as possible. When the ruler of the city heard about this attack, he immediately summoned all the knights he had available, alongside with elite-ranking mercenaries from the Mercenary Union, to defend Harvest City. The Lord was extremely anxious about Wolf Riders making Harvest City as their main target. That's why they can't send anyone to help us. The Lord of Marshall understood the city ruler's arrangement, but he was not pleased that he was not able to send any help at all. Sending a few knights from Harvest City wouldn't have much effect on the defense of Harvest City anyways. Moreover, Lord Marshall was certain that the Wolf Riders would never send a large number of their elite troops to the depth of the human world because if their campaign had failed, the loss of these elite troops would cause a massive blow to the status of the Wolf Rider race in the Orc Empire. No matter orcs or humans, they were both very valuable for highly trained soldiers. It was extremely difficult and required a lot of resources to train every single one of them. It would have depleted all of their families' resources even for middle-class families. This was why the orcs were throwing so many new orc warriors into the human world, but so few elite warriors into the human world. Although the fertility of the orcs was very strong, the resources of the Orc Empire were very limited. Every year, there would be a large number of orc warriors participating in the life and trial of death in hopes of attaining resources. The Orc Empire used this test to eliminate the weaker orcs. By doing so, not only would reduce the consumption of resources, but it also helped in selecting elite soldiers to expand the army. As the Lord of Marshall had speculated, there shouldn't be too many elite Wolf Riders traveling to the human world this time. The reason why the elite knight of Soroya had failed was probably because he was trapped in his castle, unable to get on his war horse. Although his fighting ability might still be a bit stronger than normal warriors since the knight's training was so much better, he still could not fully express the knight techniques he was expertise in. The Wolf Riders had some of the strongest mounts around, maybe only 2 elite Wolf Rider could take down the trapped knight of Soroya. The strength of these knights relied mostly on their superior numbers, the power they unleash would be multiplied if there were more knights. A knight could face a Wolf Rider, and 10 knights would have easily defeat 50 Wolf Riders as long as they are given time to charge. The survival ability of a lone knight was much lower. Preparing for a possible battle, Abel said to the Knight Brigade, "Elliot, please help me buy small gems in bulk and send it back to Harry's castle as soon as possible." As he spoke, Abel placed his hands on the Horadric Cube inside his coat and took 500 gold coins, and placed them into a money bag to give to Elliot. "Yes, master." Elliot did not inquire about the purpose of the gems, but quickly took the coins and rode away. When the Lord of Marshall and Abel returned to Harry's castle, they found it safe and looked at each other with a sigh of relief. In regards to Abel Castle, there shouldn't be any worries since it was mostly empty. Moreover, very few people knew that the previous Marshall Castle had now become the Abel Castle. Before Abel's lord title was officially declared by the king, no outsider would even know that he had gained a fiefdom. Chapter 75, The New Function of the Horadric Cube. As Abel went back to his room, he began to think about what he could do to prevent these wolf riders from taking revenge. He knew that even if he decided to hand them back the Holy Wolf's treasure, it still wouldn't guarantee that they would stop seeking their revenge. The reason why Abel had sent the Knight of Elliot to purchase those small gems was because he was planning to replenish all the used-up exploding big sword in the Horadric Cube. For the worst scenario, he was also planning to prepare a super exploding big sword made with a perfect gem, which would unleash mutual destruction if necessary. Of course, that was only Abel's worst-case scenario, but it was only a matter of time. Some while ago, Abel had an idea about that exploding big sword. He wanted to test whether if it was possible to extend the duration of the explosion. However, as Abel was busy with other things, this project seemed to have drifted off his mind. Suddenly, a faint sound of knocking came from outside the door, dong dong dong. Abel could tell it was the maid who was outside. The maids were professionally trained, and there was a fixed rule about their knocks. On weekdays, 2 knocks meant an ordinary matter, however, 3 knocks means there was an urgent matter for Abel. "Come in," Abel said while looking at the door. "The Lord of Marshall is waiting for you downstairs, young master," said the maid, bending her knees while saluting towards Abel. When Abel heard the news, he walked straight past the maid and directly down the stairs, although he felt a bit disrespectful afterward. As soon as Abel had walked down the stairs, he heard a group of voices said in unison, "Hello, young Master Abel." To his surprise, there was a team of 20 knight servants with the hairy family coat of arms standing behind the Lord of Marshall. They were all equipped with full-body armor. Abel carefully examined these knight servants, each of them was at least 40 years old or older. From their imposing manner, they seemed to be the most kick-ass group of beginner warriors. Abel never knew that Harry's castle had a team of knight servants like this. He could only recognize around 3 to 4 faces. Other than that, Abel had never seen any of them in his life before. Knight servants were also known as reserve knights. They were generally no more than 20 years old. They would often learn by the side of a knight while serving them, maintaining the weapons as well as taking care of the warhorse. Since knight servants were considered much nobler than ordinary people, a large number of soldiers decided to become a knight servant for the status. Furthermore, knights required someone that knows how to fight to assist them, which meant that these knight servants were ranked higher than the noble bodyguards. "Abel, all the knight servants here are the ones I have brought back from the war against the orcs. We are all brothers who would live and die together. Since they have given everything to me, I will trust them with all my will. Today, the castle is in danger and I will put this team in your hand. I hope you can arm them as much as possible," the Lord of Marshall said in a serious tone. The Lord of Marshall was afraid that Abel would not have the leadership skills to control Harry's castle, so he warned him in advance now. Abel then turned to the 20 knights and asked softly, "Can I trust you?" While Abel didn't speak loudly, these knights in the castle hall were able to hear every word of Abel clearly. They then bent down on their knees and shouted in unison, "Lord Abel, we dare to die for the Harry family." From calling him Master Abel to Lord Abel, these 20 knight servants had sworn their allegiance to the heir of the family. The oath of allegiance was considered as a very big decision in this world, and very few people would break it. Afterward, Abel quickly pointed towards Elliot, whom he knew well. "Elliot, come here and take off all your gear. Let me check them first." The knight servant, Elliot, took a step forward and saluted to Abel, "Yes, my lord." With that, Elliot stripped off his gear one by one and placed it in front of Abel. Abel first picked up the helmet. He looked and gently tapped its surface. The bowler hat, also known as the skull cap, was made from 3 pieces of iron. The helmet's craftsmanship was very average as Abel examined it carefully. Then he picked up the leather armor, which was on the heavier side. Its surface was covered with small pieces of iron. This was typical armor, and it seemed to have a decent defense. The right-hand weapon was a one-handed long sword with 80 skills. When Abel held it on his hands, he quickly realized that it was the work of Geddon, who was one of Master Bentham's apprentice. It was carefully crafted and the quality was very good as well. The left-hand weapon was a round shield, which was also made of 80 skills iron base, and also the work of Geddon. It didn't seem to be very big. It would not only not get in the way during attacks, but it could also effectively protect the important positions on the body. Everybody put down your swords and shields. Elliot, get 2 men to bring the sword and shield to my operation room. Abel ordered. The quality of the weapons and shields that these knight servants used were good enough. They meet the basic requirements for rune drafting, so Abel decided to convert them into magic weapons. After saying goodbye to the Lord of Martial, Abel took out his rune pen and ink from upstairs, as well as the large bag of broken gems that was brought back by Elliot. He then took all of these stuff into his operations room. In the operations room, Knight Servant Elliot had already placed his sword and shield in the empty space of the operations room. He then stood on the side with his hands bound, as he waited for Abel's orders. "Don't let anyone bother me while I'm making magic weapons," said Abel. "Yes, Lord Abel." When Elliot went out, he immediately called the other 19 knights to the door of the operations room. They did not know whether Abel's process of making magic weapons was dangerous or not, so knight servants would not let anyone get anywhere close to Abel. They basically blocked the entire operating room entirely. One could only access it if all 19 knights died. In the operations room, Abel first combined a bunch of small broken stones into ordinary stones. He realized the price the Knight of Elliot had paid was much cheaper than the price he normally pay. It seemed like buying things with the noble title was a scam. He then combined a bunch of red gem into a piece of perfect red gem. This was in preparation for the super exploding big sword. The next step was to make magic weapons. Abel was about to draw a rune on a non-self-made weapon for the first time. Previously, he had full control over every single process of making his magic weapons, from forging the iron base to the rune drawing. Abel picked up a single-handed long sword made by Geddon with his hand. He used his power of will to carefully inspect for any small mistakes. There was a minor flaw, but it shouldn't matter too much. After inspecting the weapon, Abel realized the items that were left over from the previous days had made quite a mess on the operations table. Abel then flicked his hand and threw the single-handed long sword into the Horadric Cube. After tidying up the mess on the operations table, Abel's spirit sank into the Horadric Cube. He was about to retrieve the one-handed long sword. However, a startling scene stopped him. When Abel's power of the will rested on the one-handed long sword in the Horadric Cube, a set of characters appeared on its surface. It was in Chinese. At this moment, Abel almost shed tears, such a familiar language. For so long, he almost seemed to forget about his previous world. There was a fear in Abel's heart that he would forget about his past. He was afraid of forgetting about his original parents, friends, and everything about his old world. He had already forgotten the faces of some of his old friends, and he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to remember his parents' faces one day. The Horadric Cube that came with him into this world was his only hope in remembering his past. It was the foundation of his peaceful existence in this world. With the cube beside him, he felt that his previous world was almost supporting him. Since Chinese characters had appeared once again, his doubt has been confirmed. The Horadric Cube really did come from his previous world. The Chinese characters were all white and red. One-handed sword, normal. Single-hand damage, 2 to 3. Durability, 21 by 24. Abel was shocked to realize that the Horadric Cube was able to display the properties of a weapon. Although not as fully equipped as Diablo II. This world was a real world, and it made sense that it was completely different from the world of a game. Nevertheless, Abel was very happy to see that the statistics of these weapons were being displayed. But how come the weapons he put in the Horadric Cube before never displayed any properties? No one could answer Abel. After careful speculation, there could only be 2 reasons. One reason might be that every weapon he had shoved in the Horadric Cube before was forged by himself. Another reason might be that since his power of the will had increased tremendously, it unlocked more features within the Horadric Cube. Chapter 76, Being Busy and Eating Lunch. Abel threw his ice magic sword into his Horadric Cube. His power of the will was fully fixed on it, and soon a message appeared. Big Sword of Frost, normal. Single hand damage, 3 to 7. Durability, 24 by 24. Plus 1 to 2 ice damage, effect lasts for 2 seconds. The words, Big Sword of Frost, normal, was written in a bold blue font. It was unlike the single-hand longsword before, which was entirely white. Turns out, that single-hand longsword was considered as a white weapon, and this ice magic sword was considered as blue weapons, also known as magic weapons. When Abel saw the font of the word, Frost, that appeared, he noticed it was the same style of font as the one from Diablo II. Frost, meaning damage caused by ice magic. However, the original property of 10 #Thul rune suggested plus 3 to 14 ice damage. The effect lasts for 3 seconds. Ice defense increase by 30%. Due to the material used in the rune ink and the big sword, the effect remained at 1 to 2 damage, and it lasts for 1 second less. Abel had no idea how he could increase the power of this rune. The new discovery had given Abel a lot of motivation. He picked up the single-hand long sword with a tong and threw it into the furnace. After it had been heated, he took it out and put a hole in it. He then repeated this process for 19 more times and ended up with 20 single-hand longswords with holes. Since he was in a hurry, and he did not rest at all during this process. The process of writing runes was very smooth as well. Since his power of the will had increased tremendously, he could draw runes on 5 of these long swords before taking a rest. Just like that, he only spent the night, ruthlessly working until noon of the next day before all 20 long swords were finished. Since Abel had been working non-stop, during lunchtime he sat in the dining hall of Harry Castle viciously munching on a big bowl of leopard meat. The Lord of Marshall understood the reason behind Abel's lack of table manners, so he did not say a thing. He only looked at the often well-mannered Abel gorging his food, with a smile. "Uncle Marshall, I am a little hungry today," said Abel as he noticed the attention of the Lord of Marshall. He suddenly realized the way he was eating was lacking in manners. Manners were very important on the dining table of nobles, and Abel was a bit ashamed of himself. Normally Abel was very careful when it came to small details like these. He had been in this world for more than 2 years. Although he took precaution in the beginning, now, he found himself fitting in quite well. It was only after a day of intense labor when his power of the will could no longer function, did he forget about this little detail of manner. "Don't worry about it. That's my boy," the Lord of Marshall exclaimed. Since Abel had arrived at Harry Castle, everything he did was very mature, so he had never been a worry to the Lord of Marshall. Because of this, the Lord of Marshall never really had any parenthood experience. When the topic of Abel came up during the conversations with his friends, he would always just say that Abel was very well behaved. He could not fully express the impose of being a stepfather. The Knight of Bennett and the Lord of Marshall held a similar place in Abel's heart. When the Knight of Bennett first suggested that he wanted Abel to be adopted by the Lord of Marshall, Abel did not resist too much. This was because the Abel currently did not want to just replace the old Abel, and by being adopted by the Lord of Marshall, he could fully become the new Abel, an Abel that was more true to himself. "Uncle Marshall, I am no longer a child," Abel emphasized. In this world, a 13-year-old was considered a young adult. He would not allow anyone to call him a kid. This was another way for Abel to come across as he had fully fit into this world. If he was still on Earth, the adult Abel would never say such a thing. "You are right, you are not a kid," said the Lord of Marshall, while laughing loudly. "How are the magic weapons going?" asked the Lord of Marshall, with a caring tone. If things continued to escalate, it seemed like the Wolf Rider might attack Harry Castle in 2 days. The latest news from the scouts stated that a small group of Wolf Rider was roaming around outside Harvest City. But the Lord of Marshall's experience told him that this was probably just the Wolf Riders' plan to keep the Harvest City military forces within the surrounding Harvest City. Viscount Dickens must have noticed this too, but he could not take the risk. Therefore, he was damned to continue guarding Harvest City with all his military force. However, the Lord of Marshall was wrong to blame Viscount Dickens. In reality, Viscount Dickens sensed the presence of a Wolf Rider who possessed the same fighting ability as a commander knight roaming outside the city walls. That's why he was not willing to send any military force outside of Harvest City. At the same time, the head commander Wolf Rider would not show itself easily. It knew that the moment he showed himself would be the time where he would fight to the death with Viscount Dickens. This was the responsibility of Viscount Dickens. All the luxury of being a ruler of the city came with a price, and that was protecting the city and its citizens with all his will. If Viscount Dickens had sent some people to support Harry Castle, it would lower the chance of him winning against this head commander Wolf Rider. He could not take this risk for the entire city, just for the safety of a single castle. The 20 single-handed long sword was almost complete. "We should be able to give them to the knights along with a shield by tomorrow," Abel said, as he placed his cutlery on the table. "Wow, that's quick. Even though we are in a hurry, you should take care of your body too," said the Lord of Marshall. He felt like there was no way he could change Abel's crazy working style. "It's nothing compared to the time where I was making that bull carriage for you," said Abel with a smile, as he whipped the oil of his cheeks with a napkin. Cough cough, the Lord of Marshall began to blush upon hearing these words of Abe. He then proceeded to say, "The past few days I've been trying to get used to my new armor and weapons. If they are as good as before, there is no way the Wolf Riders can penetrate our castle. They will pay for what they had done." Suddenly, the Lord of Marshall thought of the Knight of Soroya again. He continued to say, "The other 2 elite knights that fought against the orcs, the Knight of Bennett and the Knight of Hopper, have also been attacked. Luckily they were prepared for it, and they safely returned to Harvest City with only some light injuries. What a bunch of arrogant Wolf Riders," said Abel, with a slight hint of anger in his voice. This area was located in the center of the human world, so it should be the safest place for humans. However, due to the series of orcs attack, it had sent anxiety into every home around here. I had heard the news that the elites from Duchy of Carmel had been ordered come here, but still, it would take at least 3 days. So if he can stay strong in these 3 days, everything will be fine, said the Lord of Marshall. Finally, there's some good news, but 3 days are more than enough time for the Wolf Rider to finish their good deeds. Can't the elites come faster? Abel complained. The Lord of Marshall then explained, it's already the fastest they can go. The closest big city from here is Sitter City. Even for them, 3 days is very fast. The country elites who come from Bakong City might take even longer, but of course, this is one of the fastest elite recruitment. Apparently it was a Wargen who had killed Prince Wyatt, so King Astor George was extremely angry. When he heard that the Wargens started to attack again, he immediately began to recruit a large number of elites from all the big cities. Abel felt an odd sense of happiness lurking within him. He was the one who actually killed a Prince Wyatt, but he successfully blamed it on the Wargens. Now, the king wanted to seek revenge by sending help, and the person he was sending help was exactly the person who had killed his son. After Abel finished his lunch, he requested the servants to deliver the food straight to his operation room during dinner time. After he finished his dinner, he continued working again. After 20 times of diamond installation, and 20 times of the power of the wool guiding, 20 single-handed longswords were complete. Abel then put one of these 20 long swords into the Horadric Cube. He concentrated on it with his power of the will, and these statistics appeared. Single-handed long sword, normal. Single-handed damage, 2 to 3. Durability, 24 by 24. Plus 1 to 2 ice damage, effect lasts for 2 seconds. The World Single-Handed Long Sword, Normal, was written in a bold blue font, which meant that it was a qualified magic weapon. This marks the end of part 19 of the story, Abe the Wizard. Thank you for listening. Please like the video and hit the subscribe button to listen more. Hit the bell icon to get notified of all the new content uploaded to the channel ASAP.